The sound of his hand striking her face cracked through the diner like a snapped branch, leaving the new waitress unconscious on the tile while the entire room froze in terrified silence. The attacker stood over her, triumphant and arrogant, completely unaware that the front door was opening for the one man in the city who doesn't believe in second chances. As the Mafia boss steps into the room and sees the blood, he doesn't ask for an explanation. He closes the distance in silence, to deliver a judgment that will change the rules of this diner forever. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. Rivano's diner always looked the same at dusk. The lights came on gradually, soft and yellow, washing over the checkered floor and the red leather booths like a practiced memory. Outside, the street hummed with traffic and unfinished conversations, but inside, time slowed, plates clinked, coffee poured. The air smelled of grilled onions, old wood, and something harder to name history perhaps. This place had seen decades pass without changing its face. It had rules, even if no one ever spoke them aloud. You came in, you ate, you paid, and whatever kind of person you were beyond those doors stayed there. That unspoken agreement was the reason Rivano's had survived so long. Clara Benson didn't know any of that when she stepped behind the counter for the late shift. She only knew her feet already ached, and she'd been here less than a week. She tied her apron carefully, smoothing the yellow fabric with both hands, as if precision could quiet her nerves. The uniform didn't quite feel like hers yet. Nothing did. New places never did. She moved carefully between tables, memorizing patterns who needed refills, who wanted to be left alone, who spoke too loudly. She learned quickly. She had to. Her voice stayed soft, her smile polite but distant. She didn't linger, didn't invite conversation. Most customers barely noticed her at all, and that suited her just fine. The regulars noticed anyway. Not because she stood out, but because she didn't. They noticed the way she listened more than she spoke, the way her eyes stayed lowered, but never unfocused. They noticed she didn't laugh at jokes that were meant to test her, and that she didn't flinch when voices rose. It wasn't fear. It was something else, control, maybe. Or practice. Near the back of the diner, a man sat alone in a booth, his arm stretched across the vinyl seat, fingers drumming lazily. He had been there when Clara arrived and hadn't moved since. His dark shirt blended into the shadows, but his attention didn't waver. Each time Clara passed, his eyes followed, sharp and unashamed. He watched the way she carried herself, the way she avoided eye contact without seeming small. Men like him noticed details. Men like him expected reactions. The first comment came when Clara brought his coffee. It was casual, almost friendly, delivered with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. She answered professionally, set the mug down, and moved on. The second comment came louder, a little sharper. Clara paused just long enough to acknowledge him, then stepped away. A few patrons glanced over their shoulders. Someone at the counter shifted uncomfortably. No one said anything. Rivano's wasn't a place where people stepped in. Clara felt the shift in the room, even if she didn't look back. The air changed, thickened, like a held breath. She kept moving, tray balanced against her palm, pulse steady. She had learned a long time ago that responding to the wrong kind of attention was an invitation. Silence was safer. Behind her, the man's smile thinned. He stood slowly, chair scraping just enough to be noticed. Conversation dipped, then resumed in quieter tones. Clara reached the counter and set down a plate, her reflection faint in the metal surface. For a brief moment, she considered asking for help, calling the manager. But she dismissed the thought just as quickly. She didn't want trouble. Trouble had a way of growing teeth. "Hey," the man said, his voice closer now. Clara turned. She met his eyes for the first time, calm, neutral. "Yes, sir?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. He hadn't expected her to look at him like that, like she wasn't impressed, or afraid, or interested. He leaned closer, invading her space, his voice dropping just enough to make it personal. A comment meant to humiliate, to claim ground. Clara listened, her expression unchanged. "I hear you," she said quietly when he finished. "But I need to get back to my tables." For a split second, the diner was silent. The man stared at her, jaw tight, then laughed once, sharp and humorless. He stepped aside, gesturing with exaggerated politeness. Clara walked past him, her shoulders square, her steps even. Behind her, The man watched, and something in his eyes hardened. By the time Clara reached the far end of the diner, the sound of the door opening cut through the low murmur of voices. A few heads turned instinctively. The man from the booth straightened, his attention snapping away from Clara. Someone else had entered. He moved fast, not rushed, as if the room had already made space for him. Black suit, no tie, shirt open at the collar, tattoos visible against his skin like quiet warnings. His hair was neatly styled, untouched by the chaos he was walking into. His expression was cold, focused, unreadable. Stefano Davide took in the room in a single glance. He saw the tension, the way people avoided looking at the man standing too close to the waitress. He saw the slight tremor in the air, the rules bending under pressure. His jaw tightened, but he didn't slow. The man near Clara noticed him then. Recognition hit like a wave. Color drained from his face as Stefano closed the distance, each step deliberate. The diner parted without a word. Even the walls seemed to listen. Stefano stopped just behind him. "Move," he said calmly. The man didn't. What happened next took seconds. One precise motion, controlled, final. The man collapsed to the floor, conscious but helpless, his authority stripped away as quickly as it had been claimed. No one shouted, no one cheered. Plates rattled on tables and then stilled. Stefano knelt beside Clara as she sank to the floor, the room finally erupting in noise behind him. He checked her pulse, his expression softening just slightly. "She's breathing," he said. "Call for help." As voices overlapped and someone reached for a phone, Stefano remained where he was, steady and composed. Around him, Ravano's diner exhaled for the first time all night. The rules had been broken, and nothing inside those walls would ever feel the same again. Clara drifted in and out of awareness to the sound of voices layered over one another, sharp and distant at the same time. Someone was crying. Someone else kept repeating her name. The smell of coffee was still there, stubbornly familiar, mixed now with metal and antiseptic. When she finally opened her eyes, the ceiling lights of Ravano's blurred above her, stretching and warping as if the room itself had been shaken loose. She tried to move. Pain flared behind her eyes, bright and immediate, forcing a gasp from her chest. "Easy," a voice said nearby. "Calm, steady, not rushed. Don't try to sit up yet." Clara blinked again, her vision slowly sharpening. Faces hovered above her customers she recognized only by habit, not name. Their expressions were tight, uneasy, guilty. She searched them without meaning to, as if looking for something familiar, something safe. Then she felt a presence beside her that wasn't frantic or afraid. Stefano Davide knelt close, one hand braced on the floor, the other hovering near her shoulder without touching. His gaze was fixed on her face, assessing, focused, as though the chaos around them barely existed. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined him, if pain had conjured a protector out of thin air. "You're at Ravano's," he said gently. "You were hurt. Help is coming." Her throat felt dry. "The tables," she murmured, words thick. "I need to." "You don't," he replied. There was no argument in his tone, only certainty. "Not tonight." Someone pushed through the crowd with a first aid kit. Another voice announced an ambulance was on the way. The diner buzzed with motion now, but it was different than before. People moved carefully, eyes darting toward Stefano and then away again, as if afraid to disturb the balance he had restored. Clara let her eyes close again, just for a second. When she opened them, the man who had struck her was gone. Only an empty space remained, marked by overturned chairs and a silence that still lingered like smoke. She was lifted onto a stretcher moments later, her body protesting every shift. As she was wheeled toward the door, she caught fragments of conversation, half-finished apologies, shaken reassurances. No one met her eyes for long. Looking at her meant remembering what they hadn't done. Outside, the night air hit her face, cool and grounding. The siren's distant wail grew louder, then faded as the ambulance doors closed. Clara stared up at the ceiling, watching lights pass overhead, her thoughts drifting despite the ache pulsing behind her eyes. She thought about the moment just before it happened, the way the room had gone quiet, the way everyone had felt it coming and chosen stillness over action. Looking away had been easier. When she returned to Ravano's 2 days later, the diner felt different. The lights were the same, the booths hadn't moved, but something invisible had shifted. Conversations dipped when she entered. A few people offered awkward smiles, others nodded with a respect that hadn't been there before. She touched the faint bandage near her temple, adjusting it gently. The scar beneath it throbbed, a reminder she couldn't ignore. She tied on her apron more slowly this time, her hands steady but deliberate. "You don't have to come back yet," the manager told her quietly. "We can give you more time." "I'm fine," Clara said. The words surprised even her. They were true. She stepped onto the floor, the familiar rhythm returning as she moved between tables. Her body was sore, but her posture was different, straighter, firmer. She noticed people watching her now, not with curiosity, but with something closer to respect. Near the back booth, someone had left a folded napkin with a note scribbled in hurried ink. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything. No name, no explanation." Clara tucked it into her pocket without comment. Not everyone came back, though. A few regulars stayed away, unwilling to sit in the same space where the rules had failed so publicly. Others returned cautiously, glancing toward the door whenever it opened, as if expecting history to repeat itself. Stefano didn't return that night, or the next. But his presence lingered in the way people lowered their voices, in the way they chose their words more carefully. Power, Clara realized, didn't need to stay to be felt. Late into the shift, as she wiped down the counter, another waitress leaned close. "You okay?" she asked softly. Clara nodded. "Yeah." The other woman hesitated. "People should have helped you." "Yes," Clara agreed. She didn't sound angry, just certain. When the door chimed near closing time, a few heads turned instinctively. It was only a couple heading in for coffee, but the reaction said everything. The diner remembered. Clara glanced toward the entrance, then back to her work. She understood now what Ravano's neutrality had cost. Silence had protected the powerful and punished the quiet. And while she hadn't chosen what happened to her, she could choose what came next. As she finished her shift and stepped outside into the night, Clara felt something settle inside her. Not fear, not anger, but resolve. The price of looking away had been paid. She wasn't interested in paying it again. And somewhere beyond the glow of Ravano's lights, the man who had ended the fight in seconds was already watching how the ripples spread. The next night at Ravano's began quietly, almost deceptively so. The diner filled the way it always did, slow at first, then steadily voices layering over one another until the room hummed with familiarity. Clara moved through it with practiced ease, her body remembering what her mind still questioned. Each step felt measured, intentional. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. People watched her more openly now. Some smiled. Some looked away. A few seemed to study her, as if trying to understand what kind of person comes back to the place where they were hurt and stands upright behind the counter like nothing had happened. Clara felt their eyes, but she didn't let them change her pace. She poured coffee, took orders, wiped down the counter. She kept her voice even. She told herself the rules still held, that Ravano's was still Ravano's. Then she felt it, that subtle tightening in her chest. The sensation she'd learned to trust long before words ever caught up to it. Someone new had entered. She didn't turn right away. She didn't need to. The shift in the room told her everything. Conversations dipped just enough to be noticeable. Chairs stopped scraping. The air grew heavier, like a storm gathering but refusing to break. He stood near the doorway, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding without effort. His eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately, as if cataloging faces, exits, reactions. When his gaze landed on Clara, it didn't soften, it sharpened. He took a step forward, then another. Clara's pulse quickened, but she kept her hands steady. She reminded herself of what she knew. People like this thrived on response, on fear, on spectacle. She wouldn't give him that. "Hey," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the room. She didn't answer right away. She finished placing a plate on a table, thanked the customer quietly, and turned. "Yes," she said. The man smiled, and this time it wasn't thin or mocking. It was confident, possessive. "Didn't think you'd be back," he said, loud enough for others to hear. Most people learn. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. No one intervened. "I work here," Clara replied. Her voice didn't rise. "Can I get you something?" He laughed, shaking his head slowly. "Still polite. I like that." He moved closer, closing the space between them in a way that felt intentional, rehearsed. This wasn't rage. It was performance. Clara saw it clearly now. He wanted the room, wanted eyes on him, wanted her diminished in front of witnesses. She took a small step back, enough to breathe. "Sir," she said quietly. You need to sit down or leave." The laughter stopped. The room went silent. The man stared at her, as if she had spoken a language he didn't expect. His jaw tightened, the smile fading into something colder. He reached out, not suddenly, but deliberately, and took hold of her wrist. Gasps rippled through the diner. Clara froze. Not in fear, but in calculation. She knew this moment, knew the cost of pulling away too fast, of escalating too visibly. She met his eyes, steady. "Let go," she said. He leaned in, his grip tightening just enough to hurt. "You don't tell me what to do." No one moved. That was when Clara understood fully, not just that he could hurt her, but that he believed he could do it without consequence. The room had already decided. Silence had chosen a side. She twisted her wrist sharply and stepped back, breaking free. It wasn't graceful, but it was enough. "I'm asking you to leave," she said again, louder now. The man's face darkened. Wrong answer. What happened next unfolded too fast for anyone to stop it. His hand came up, not wild or frantic, but controlled, calculated. The sound cracked through the diner like a snapped branch. Clara felt the impact before she felt pain. A flash of white filled her vision as the world tilted violently to one side. She stumbled, her feet failing to catch her weight, and then the floor rushed up to meet her. The room exploded into noise. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped back. A glass shattered. Clara hit the tile hard, her head ringing, the ceiling spinning above her. She tried to breathe, but air felt thick, distant. She tasted blood. The lights blurred into streaks of yellow and white. She heard footsteps approaching. The man loomed over her, his shadow swallowing the light. She could see his mouth moving, words spilling out that she couldn't make sense of. He looked triumphant, satisfied, control restored. The fear in the room was almost physical now. People stood frozen, trapped between shock and instinct. No one stepped forward. No one reached for her. Clara tried to move. Her body didn't respond. That was when the door opened. The sound cut through everything clean, sharp, undeniable. The man above her stiffened. A few heads turned slowly, as if afraid of what they might see. Footsteps crossed the diner, fast but measured. Stefano Davide entered the room like a decision already made. He took in the scene in a single glance. Clara on the floor, blood at her temple. The man standing over her as if claiming victory. His expression didn't change. Not anger. Not surprise. Just focus. He walked straight toward them. The room parted instinctively, bodies shifting out of his path without conscious thought. The man noticed him then, recognition flashing across his face like fear finally catching up. Stefano stopped just behind him. "Enough," he said quietly. The word carried weight, finality. The man turned halfway, defiance flickering in his eyes. "This doesn't concern—" He never finished the sentence. Stefano moved. One precise motion. Efficient. Unmistakable. The man collapsed, the sound of his body hitting the floor swallowed by the silence that followed. Stefano knelt beside Clara immediately, his hand hovering near her shoulder, careful not to startle her if she could still hear. He checked her pulse, his jaw tightening just slightly. "She's alive," he said. "Call for help." Only then did the diner breathe again. For a moment after the man hit the floor, no one spoke. The diner held its breath. Clara lay on the tile, the world drifting in and out around her. Sounds muffled as if she were underwater. Somewhere close, she felt a presence steady and grounded, shielding her from the chaos that should have followed but didn't. The fear in the room had turned thick, almost solid, pressing in from every direction. People stood frozen where they were, hands hovered midair. Conversations died on tongues, even the hum of the lights seemed to dim, as if Ravanos itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The man who had struck her groaned softly from the floor. The sound snapped something loose. Chairs scraped back. Someone finally shouted for an ambulance. Another voice followed, louder, panicked, overlapping words tumbling out too fast to understand. But still, no one rushed toward Clara. They looked at her, at the blood, at the stillness of her body, and then they looked at Stefano. He remained kneeling beside her, one knee on the tile, his attention fixed entirely on her breathing. He spoke quietly to someone behind him, giving instructions without urgency, as if calm itself were a tool. People responded immediately, scrambling to do exactly what he said. It struck Clara dimly, even through the haze, how quickly the room obeyed him, not because he demanded it, because they were afraid not to. A hand brushed her arm, careful and tentative. Someone dabbed at the blood near her temple. The touch was gentle, but it carried something heavier than concern, guilt. Maybe Clara wanted to tell them it was all right, that she understood, that fear made people small. But her mouth wouldn't cooperate, and the effort slipped away from her. She heard someone crying openly now. A woman near the counter sobbed into her hands, whispering over and over that she should have said something. A man near the door stared at the floor, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. The truth hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. They had all seen it coming. They had all chosen silence. Stefano shifted slightly, blocking Clara from view as paramedics pushed through the crowd. The doors swung open, letting in a rush of cold night air that smelled of rain and asphalt. Red and blue lights flashed against the diner windows, painting the walls in uneasy color. "She's stable," one of the medics said after a brief assessment. "But she took a hard hit." Stefano nodded once. "Take her." As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Clara felt the motion tug her back toward consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to catch a glimpse of the room she had just left, faces pale, shaken, no longer sure of their place in it. As the stretcher rolled toward the door, Clara's gaze drifted past the tables, past the counter, until it found the spot where the man had first stood over her. The space felt empty now, stripped of whatever authority it once held. Outside, the night swallowed her. Inside the diner, the silence lingered. The man lay on the floor where he had fallen, restrained now, his earlier confidence reduced to shallow breaths and averted eyes. He didn't look dangerous anymore. He looked small. People avoided looking at him, not out of fear, but out of something closer to shame. Stefano rose to his feet slowly. When he turned to face the room, every pair of eyes snapped to him. No one needed to be told to pay attention. "This place survives because it stays neutral," he said calmly, his voice carried without effort. "But neutrality is not the same as permission." No one argued. He gestured toward the man on the floor. What he did was not power, it was weakness. And weakness that harms others has consequences. The words settled deep, heavy and final. Someone near the door nodded. Another wiped their face. The diner had learned something tonight, whether it wanted to or not. By the time the police arrived, the story had already solidified in the room's collective memory. Details would change later. Names would blur, but the moment would remain clear: the sound of the strike, the stillness that followed, and the way one man's presence had turned fear back on itself. Afterward, Ravano's closed early. The chairs were stacked, the counter wiped down in silence. The smell of disinfectant replaced coffee and grease. Staff moved carefully, speaking in low voices, as if loud sounds might shatter something fragile. When the last light was switched off, the diner stood empty, its familiar warmth replaced by a hollow quiet. Outside, the street returned to normal, traffic flowing past without pause. But inside those walls, something had changed. People would talk about that night for years, about the waitress who didn't fight back and the room that didn't step in, about the man who did, and about the cost of looking away when it mattered most. For Clara, lying in the ambulance as it carried her through the city, the night replayed itself in fragments: the silence, the blow, the faces, and finally, the calm voice that had cut through everything else. She didn't know yet why he had come, or what it meant that he had, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity: the rules of Ravano's diner were no longer what they had been, and neither was she. By the time Clara returned to Ravano's, the story had already grown teeth. She heard it in pieces before she ever stepped back inside. A butcher down the block spoke of it in a low voice, shaking his head as he wrapped paper around cuts of meat. A neighbor mentioned it in passing, careful not to linger on details. Everyone used the same phrases, ended it in seconds, didn't raise his voice. Didn't have to. No one said the name out loud. Ravano's looked unchanged from the outside. Same windows, same sign humming softly above the door. But when Clara pushed it open, she felt the difference immediately. The air was heavier, as if the room remembered what had happened and was waiting to see what she would do next. She stepped inside anyway. Conversations dipped, then resumed, softer than before. Heads turned. Some people offered small nods of acknowledgement. Others avoided her eyes altogether. Clara walked to the counter and set down her bag, her movements calm and deliberate. The faint scar near her temple pulled slightly when she frowned, but she ignored it. The diner wasn't full yet. It was early evening, that in-between hour when the regulars trickled in before the rush. Clara poured herself a glass of water and took a slow sip, grounding herself in the familiar routine. The door opened again. This time, the reaction was immediate. Voices stopped mid-sentence. Chairs stilled. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade beneath the sudden awareness that swept the room. Clara didn't need to turn to know who it was. Stefano Davide entered Ravano's the same way he had before, without hesitation, without announcement. Black suit, no tie. Shirt open at the collar, tattoos visible against his skin like warnings written in ink. His hair was perfectly in place, his expression cold and focused, as if emotion were a luxury he chose not to indulge. He scanned the room once, efficiently. Then his eyes found Clara. She felt the weight of his attention settle on her, steady and unyielding. Not possessive, not intrusive, observant. Stefano walked toward the counter, his pace brisk but unhurried. The room parted for him instinctively, people shifting aside without realizing they were doing it. He stopped a few feet from Clara and studied her face carefully. "You shouldn't be back yet," he said. "I'm fine," Clara replied. Her voice was even, though her pulse quickened. "I don't like unfinished things." A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Neither do I." They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged but quiet. Around them, Ravano's held its breath. "You saved my life," Clara said finally. Stefano shook his head once. "I stopped something that shouldn't have happened." "That's the same thing," she said. He didn't argue. Instead, he glanced around the diner, taking in the people watching them, the careful distance they kept. "This place relies on people pretending not to see," he said calmly. "That only works until someone decides it doesn't." Clara followed his gaze. They were scared. "Yes," Stefano agreed. "And fear makes people predictable." He turned back to her. "You weren't." The words landed heavier than praise. Clara folded her hands together, steadying them. "You came quickly." "I was already on my way," he replied. That answer raised more questions than it settled. Clara studied his face, searching for cracks, for anything that might reveal more than he intended. There was nothing, just control, honed and absolute. "Why?" she asked quietly. Stefano's eyes flicked briefly toward the back of the diner, where the shadows gathered between booths. "Because Ravano's is important," he said, "and because people who mistake silence for weakness tend to make mistakes." Clara nodded slowly. She understood that language. A waitress approached hesitantly, holding a coffee pot. "Can I get you something?" Stefano shook his head without looking away from Clara. The waitress retreated at once. "You're being watched now," he said. "Whether you want it or not." "I already was," Clara replied. That earned her a longer look. Something unreadable passed through his eyes' assessment perhaps, or respect. Stefano reached into his jacket and placed a folded card on the counter. He didn't slide it toward her. He simply set it down, precise. "If anyone gives you trouble," he said, "you call the number on that card." "And if I don't?" Clara asked. "Then I'll know," he said calmly. The statement wasn't a threat. It was a fact. For a moment, Clara considered pushing back, testing the boundaries of his authority the way others had tested hers, but she didn't. She recognized restraint when she saw it. "You didn't have to do what you did," she said instead. Stefano met her gaze. "Yes," he replied. "I did." Silence settled between them again, heavier this time, layered with understanding. Neither of them spoke aloud. Then, without ceremony, Stefano turned and walked toward the door. As it closed behind him, the diner exhaled as one. Conversations resumed slowly. Someone laughed too loudly, then fell quiet. Life at Ravano's crept back toward normal, but it wasn't the same normal it had been before. Clara picked up the card and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't look at it yet. She didn't need to. She wiped down the counter, her movements smooth and practiced, her posture steady. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Ravano's had always been neutral ground. Now, it was something else entirely. The man never saw it coming. That was the part people would argue about later, whether he should have known, whether the warning signs were obvious, whether arrogance had finally dulled his instincts. But in that moment, standing over Clara's motionless body, breathing hard with the room locked in silence, he believed the night still belonged to him. Fear had done its work. He straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders back as if reclaiming the space, as if daring anyone to challenge him. His eyes swept the diner, lingering on faces that refused to meet his gaze. He smiled again, wide this time, triumphant. That was when Stefano Davide closed the distance. There was no dramatic announcement, no raised voice, just the sound of measured footsteps crossing tile. The man sensed something behind him, something different from fear, and turned halfway. irritation flashing across his face. "You got something too." Stefano moved. The motion was clean and economical, so fast it barely registered as violence. One step, one shift of balance. His hand caught the man's wrist and twisted, forcing the joint into a position it was never meant to occupy. The smile vanished, replaced by a sharp cry that cut through the room like glass. Before the man could recover, Stefano swept his leg and drove him down with controlled force. The impact rattled nearby chairs. Plates trembled on tables. It was over. The man lay on the floor, conscious but immobilized, gasping as pain and shock caught up to him. His earlier confidence bled away, replaced by disbelief. He tried to move. He couldn't. Stefano didn't stand over him in triumph. He didn't shout or threaten. He simply released the grip and took one step back, giving the man space to understand what had just happened. "You're done," Stefano said calmly. The words carried no anger, no satisfaction, only finality. The room remained frozen. People stared, unsure whether to react, unsure whether breathing too loudly might draw attention. Fear had shifted, subtle but unmistakable. It no longer belonged to the man on the floor. It belonged to everyone else. Stefano turned his back on him without another glance and knelt beside Clara. He checked her pulse first, then her breathing, his movements careful and precise. His jaw tightened just enough to betray concern. Blood streaked from a cut near her temple, dark against the pale tile. "She's breathing," he said to the room. "Call an ambulance." That broke the spell. Someone scrambled for a phone. Another person rushed forward with a napkin, then hesitated, unsure where to help. Voices overlapped, panicked and relieved all at once. Stefano stayed with Clara, one hand hovering near her shoulder, grounding her even if she couldn't feel it. He spoke quietly to her, not knowing if she could hear him. "You're safe now," he said. "Stay with me." The man on the floor groaned again, trying and failing to sit up. The sound was pitiful, unrecognizable from the dominance he had wielded moments earlier. Stefano looked up. "Don't," he said, not raising his voice. The man froze instantly. That was when everyone understood. This wasn't about strength or size. It was about certainty, about knowing exactly where you stood and where you didn't. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone held Clara's hand gently, tears streaking down their face as they whispered apologies she couldn't answer. When the paramedics arrived, they worked quickly, slipping into practiced rhythm. Stefano moved aside just enough to let them assess her, but he didn't leave. He watched every motion, every exchange, his attention unwavering. "She took a hard hit," one medic said. "But she's stable." Stefano nodded once. As they lifted Clara onto the stretcher, her eyes fluttered open briefly. She didn't focus, didn't speak, but her fingers curled weakly around the edge of the blanket, as if reaching for something solid. Stefano leaned close. "You did nothing wrong," he said quietly. Whether she heard him or not, he didn't know. But he said it anyway. As the stretcher rolled toward the door, the room parted again, people stepping back with reverence now, not fear. Clara disappeared into the flashing lights outside, leaving behind a diner forever altered. Only then did Stefano turn his attention back to the man on the floor. Police officers arrived moments later, weapons holstered but ready. They assessed the scene quickly, eyes flicking between the unconscious waitress, the restrained man, and Stefano himself. One officer hesitated. "Sir." Stefano met his gaze, calm, unmoving. "He assaulted her," Stefano said simply. "Witnesses everywhere." The officer looked around. Heads nodded. No one argued. The man was lifted to his feet, grimacing, his wrists cuffed. As he was led away, he looked back once, his eyes hollow now, stripped of whatever confidence had fueled him. Stefano didn't watch him leave. Instead, he faced the room. "This place survives because people agree to certain rules," he said evenly. Tonight those rules were broken. No one spoke. "Let this be the last time," he continued. "Silence protects the wrong people." With that, he turned and walked out of Ravano's diner, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft chime that sounded louder than it should have. Inside, no one moved for several seconds. Then, slowly, life resumed. But nothing felt the same. Clara woke to the steady rhythm of a machine she didn't recognize, a soft beeping, slow, patient. It took her a moment to understand where she was. The smell was different from Ravano's cleaner, sharper, tinged with disinfectant. Light pressed against her eyelids, too bright, too unforgiving. She tried to turn her head and immediately regretted it. Pain flared behind her temple, blooming outward until it filled everything. She inhaled sharply. Easy, a voice said. Calm. Familiar in a way she couldn't quite place yet. You're awake. Clara forced her eyes open. The room came into focus in pieces. White walls, a curtain pulled halfway, a chair beside the bed, and in that chair, seated with his elbows resting loosely on his knees, was the man she remembered stepping through Ravano's door like the night had bent around him. Stefano Davide. He didn't stand when she looked at him. He didn't rush to her side or soften his expression. He simply watched her carefully, as if gauging how much of the moment she could handle. You're in the hospital, he said. You took a hard hit, but you'll recover. Clara swallowed. Her throat felt dry. The diner? Closed for the night, he replied. It'll open again. She nodded faintly, absorbing that. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but heavy, with things neither had said yet. You didn't have to stay, she said finally. Stefano tilted his head slightly. Yes, he said. I did. She studied him through the haze of medication and exhaustion. Up close, he looked exactly as he had in the diner, composed, controlled, every line of him suggesting restraint rather than menace. The tattoos at his collar disappeared beneath the crisp black fabric of his suit. His hands rested loosely, relaxed, but she knew what they were capable of. They said I was out, Clara murmured. I don't remember much after I fell. Stefano's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You were unconscious, he said. Only for a short time. And him? She asked. He won't hurt anyone again, Stefano replied. He didn't elaborate. Clara let out a slow breath. Part of her wanted to ask questions to understand why he had been there, why he had intervened so quickly, why a man like him would concern himself with a waitress who barely spoke above a whisper. But another part of her already knew the answers wouldn't come easily. I should have handled it better, she said quietly. I shouldn't have let it get that far. Stefano leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. You didn't let anything happen, he said. He chose to cross a line. Clara looked away, her eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, people walked, life continued. They all saw it, she said. Everyone knew what he was doing, and no one moved. No, Stefano agreed. They didn't. The words settled heavily between them. After a moment, he added, Fear is efficient. It teaches people where not to look. Clara closed her eyes briefly. I felt invisible, she admitted. Right up until I wasn't. Stefano stood then, moving closer to the bed. He didn't touch her, but his presence grounded the space around her, made the room feel smaller, safer. You weren't invisible, he said. You were being measured. She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. By who? By people who don't understand restraint, he said. They mistake it for weakness. Clara considered that. She had spent years learning when to speak and when to stay silent, when to endure and when to walk away. She had believed that keeping her head down was enough, that neutrality protected you. Tonight had proven otherwise. A nurse entered quietly, checking monitors, adjusting a line. She glanced at Stefano, hesitated, then focused on her work. When she finished, she paused. She can go home tomorrow if everything stays stable, the nurse said. She'll need rest. Stefano nodded. Thank you. When the nurse left, Clara shifted slightly, wincing. You sound like you're used to hospitals. I'm used to consequences, Stefano replied. She almost smiled at that. Why were you there? Clara asked at last. At the diner. Stefano didn't answer right away. He studied her face, weighing something. Then he spoke carefully. Because Ravano's matters, he said. And because people inside it have been forgetting what that means. That's not the whole reason, Clara said softly. No one spoke for a long moment. You're observant, Stefano said finally. That's why you were hired there. Clara's heart skipped. I needed a job. You needed a place where no one looks too closely, he corrected. And I needed someone who knows how to disappear in plain sight. The truth clicked into place slowly, painfully. The late shift. The questions she hadn't asked. The way certain men watched her, not with desire, but curiosity. You put me there, she said. I gave you the option, Stefano replied. You chose it. Clara exhaled, processing the weight of that choice. And him? He exposed himself, Stefano said, earlier than expected. Clara stared at the ceiling. I didn't plan to get hurt. No, he said. But you did your job. She turned her head to look at him. Is that all I am to you? Stefano met her gaze without flinching. "No," he said. "You're someone who didn't break when tested." The words lingered, heavy and sincere. When he turned to leave, Clara stopped him. "Stefano." He paused. "I'm not done," she said. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "I'm not going to disappear now." A faint smile touched his lips, brief, restrained. "I didn't expect you to," he said. And with that, he left the room, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Clara alone with the truth and the choice that came with it. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay in the hospital bed long after the hallway lights dimmed, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer answers if she watched closely enough. The beeping of the monitor beside her had become a steady companion, marking time with indifferent precision. Every so often, a nurse passed by, checking charts, whispering to another voice she couldn't see. Life continued, orderly and detached, while her thoughts circled the same point again and again. "You were being measured." Stefano's words replayed with unsettling clarity. She turned them over, examined them from every angle, searching for exaggeration or manipulation. She found neither. He hadn't spoken like a man explaining himself. He had spoken like someone stating a fact. When morning came, it arrived quietly. Pale light filtered through the blinds, softening the edges of the room. Clara sat up slowly, testing her balance. Her head still throbbed, but the fog had thinned. What remained was awareness and resolve. A nurse entered with a clipboard and a careful smile. "You're doing well," she said. "Doctor will clear you later today. You've got someone waiting." Clara's pulse quickened. "Who?" The nurse hesitated, then glanced toward the door. He didn't give a name. She didn't need one. Stefano stood by the window when Clara was wheeled into a smaller consultation room, his back to her, hands folded loosely in front of him. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable, as controlled as ever. But there was something else there too, alertness, sharpened by what had already happened. "You look steadier," he said. "I feel clearer," Clara replied. The nurse excused herself, closing the door behind her. Silence settled between them, heavier than before. Clara didn't sit right away. She wanted to face him on her feet. "You said I chose Ravano's," she began. "I don't remember choosing anything but a paycheck." Stefano inclined his head slightly. "You remember the conversation," he said. "You just didn't know its weight yet." Clara crossed her arms carefully. "Then explain it." He didn't bristle. He didn't deflect. Instead, he walked to the table and sat across from her, folding his jacket neatly over the chair beside him. The tattoos at his wrists were visible now, dark lines against pale skin, deliberate and precise. "Ravano sits at the intersection of several interests," he said calmly. "Businessmen, politicians, people who prefer their conversations uninterrupted, neutral ground as they like to call it." "I know the type," Clara said. "I suspected you would," Stefano replied. "That's why you were useful." She raised an eyebrow. "Useful isn't reassuring. It's honest," he said. Clara waited. "For months," Stefano continued, "I noticed fractures. Small ones. Meetings that ended too quickly. Information traveling where it shouldn't. Loyalty becoming flexible. Inside your organization," Clara said. "Yes." She absorbed that quietly. "And you thought a diner waitress would find it." "I thought someone who knows how to listen without being noticed would," Stefano corrected. "Someone who doesn't provoke. Someone who doesn't react." Clara's jaw tightened. "You used me as bait." "No," Stefano said firmly. "Bait is disposable. You were a filter." The distinction didn't comfort her as much as he might have hoped. "You watched me," she said. "From the beginning." "Yes. And when it got dangerous, I intervened." "After I got hurt," she shot back. Stefano didn't look away. Before it went further, the words echoed painfully. Clara exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "You knew he was connected." "I suspected," Stefano said. "I didn't know he would reveal himself so publicly." "He wanted control," Clara said quietly. "Not information." "Yes," Stefano agreed. "And that's why he failed." She thought of the man's face as he stood over her, certain, entitled, convinced of his power. "He wasn't angry," she said. "He was performing." Stefano's eyes sharpened. "Exactly." Silence returned, thicker now, layered with understanding. Clara paced the small room, careful of her steps. "So what now?" she asked. "Do I go back to pretending nothing happened?" "That depends," Stefano said, "on whether you want to stop pretending." She stopped pacing and faced him. If I walk away, what happens? Rivanos continues, he said. But the fractures remain. And if I stay? Stefano studied her for a long moment. Then you'll see more than you expected. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any threat could have. I didn't ask for this, she said. No, he replied. But you were prepared for it. Clara thought back years back to the habits she'd developed without fully understanding why. Listening more than speaking, measuring rooms, noticing what people didn't say. She had always thought it was survival. Maybe it was training. Why me? She asked again, softer this time. Stefano leaned back slightly. Because when people test you, you don't rush to prove yourself, he said. You wait. And waiting reveals more than force ever does. She let that sink in. And because, he added, you have limits. You know when silence becomes complicity. Clara swallowed. That night when no one moved, I felt it, she said. The moment when doing nothing becomes a choice. Stefano nodded. That's the moment everything changes. A knock came at the door. The doctor entered briefly, reviewing her chart, confirming she was cleared to leave later that day. When he left, Clara felt the room shrink again to just the two of them. I'm not going to disappear, she said firmly. Not now. Stefano's gaze held hers. Good. She frowned slightly. That wasn't permission. I didn't take it as such, he said. They shared a look, quiet, measured, equal in its own way. Clara realized then that Stefano wasn't offering her protection in the way she had once imagined. He wasn't promising safety. He was offering truth and choice. Later that afternoon, Clara returned to Ravano's alone. The diner was empty except for the manager and one cook cleaning up the kitchen. The lights were on low, the place suspended between shifts. Clara stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. The counter, the booths, the floor where she had fallen. You don't have to come back today, the manager said gently. I want to, Clara replied. She walked slowly through the space, letting memory and reality overlap. Here was where the man had stood. Here was where no one moved. Here was where everything broke open. She reached the back booth and slid into it, sitting where she had seen so many others sit and speak freely. She closed her eyes and listened, not for danger, but for patterns. Footsteps approached. She opened her eyes to find Stefano standing across from her, having entered without announcement as usual. You came, she said. So did you, he replied. They sat in silence for a moment. I'll stay, Clara said finally. But on my terms. Stefano waited. I won't be bait, she continued. I won't be silent when silence protects the wrong people. And if I say we stop, we stop. Stefano considered her words carefully. Agreed. She searched his face, looking for hesitation. Found none. And when this is over? She asked. That, he said, will be your decision too. Clara nodded, feeling something settle inside her. Not fear, not doubt, but alignment. She stood, smoothing her apron instinctively, then paused. It's strange, she said. I always thought strength was about taking space. Stefano rose as well. It's about knowing when to, he said, and when not to. As they walked toward the door together, Clara glanced back once more at Ravano still standing, still neutral, but no longer blind. The truth was out now, and it wasn't going back behind the counter. Ravano's reopened on a Thursday. There was no announcement, no sign taped to the door explaining the brief closure, no apology to customers for the interruption. From the outside, it looked the same as it always had, the familiar sign humming softly above the entrance, the windows glowing warm against the dimming street. But anyone who stepped inside could feel it immediately. The diner remembered. Clara arrived early, before the first rush, standing across the street for a moment longer than necessary. She watched people pass, watched cars slow at the corner, watched the door open and close as staff filtered in. Her reflection in the glass startled her slightly. The faint scar near her temple was still pink, not something she could hide even if she wanted to. It gave her face a sharpness it hadn't had before. She crossed the street and pushed the door open. The bell chimed. Every sound inside Ravano seemed louder than she remembered. The scrape of a chair, the hiss of the grill warming up, a voice in the kitchen calling out an order that hadn't even been placed yet. The manager looked up from behind the counter and met her eyes. He didn't smile right away. You sure? He asked quietly. Clara nodded. Yeah. He exhaled slowly, then gestured toward the counter. Apron's where you left it. She tied it on with practiced ease. The motion felt grounding, familiar, even comforting. Whatever else had changed, this This rhythm still belonged to her. The first customers came in cautiously, as if expecting resistance from the space itself. They chose booths farther apart than usual, spoke in lower voices. A few nodded at Clara when she brought menus. One older woman reached out and squeezed her hand briefly, eyes shining. "I'm glad you're back," she said. "So am I," Clara replied, surprised to find she meant it. As the diner filled, Clara settled into the flow of work. She moved confidently now, not rushed, not tentative. She noticed the glances people exchanged when she passed, the way some conversations paused and then resumed after she moved on. She felt the weight of attention, but it no longer pressed her down. Near the back booth, a man sat alone, stirring his coffee without drinking it. His eyes tracked the room carefully, not with hunger or entitlement, but with calculation. Clara noticed him immediately. She didn't react. She didn't need to. Instead, she adjusted the order slips at the counter and waited. The door opened again. This time, the reaction was immediate. A ripple passed through the diner, subtle but unmistakable. Chairs stilled, conversations dipped. Clara didn't look up right away. She finished pouring a cup of coffee, set it down, and only then turned. Stefano Davide stood just inside the doorway. Black suit, no tie, shirt open at the collar, tattoos visible, hair immaculate. He looked exactly as he always did, untouched by noise or nerves, as if the world arranged itself around his presence, rather than the other way around. He didn't scan the room immediately this time. His gaze went straight to Clara. She met it without hesitation. Stefano walked in, his pace brisk, purposeful. The diner parted for him again, instinctively, though no one could have explained why. He stopped at the counter, resting one hand lightly on the edge. "You're early," he said. "So are you," Clara replied. A faint smile crossed his face, there, and gone before anyone else could notice. "I wanted to see how it felt." "And?" she asked. "Different," he said, "as it should." He ordered coffee and took a seat at the counter, turning slightly so he could watch the room without making a show of it. Clara poured his cup and slid it toward him. Their exchange was smooth, practiced, like something they had done 100 times already. The man in the back booth noticed Stefano then. Clara saw the moment his posture stiffened, the way his gaze darted away too quickly. He paid his bill without finishing his drink and left, his steps a little faster than necessary. Stefano watched him go, unbothered. "People are learning," Clara said quietly. "Yes," Stefano replied, "but learning takes repetition." The day wore on. More customers came. Some old faces returned, testing the waters. Others stayed away. Clara noticed the difference in how people spoke now, more careful, less entitled. The diner had become a place where neutrality meant accountability, not silence. During a lull, Clara leaned against the counter, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension. Stefano watched her for a moment before speaking. "You could have walked away," he said. "I thought about it," she admitted. And I realized if I left, Rivano's would go back to what it was," she said. "People pretending not to see." Stefano nodded slowly. "And you didn't want that?" "No," Clara said. "I wanted it to change." He studied her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "Change is rarely comfortable." "I noticed," she replied dryly. Later, as evening approached and the diner grew busier, Clara found herself enjoying the work again, not because it distracted her, but because it grounded her. She knew where she stood now. She knew what she was doing and why. A group of men entered together, their laughter loud, their presence heavy. Clara felt the shift immediately. They weren't dangerous, not in the way others had been, but they tested boundaries with volume and posture, pushing to see how much space they could claim. Clara approached their table calmly. "Evening," she said. "What can I get you?" One of them grinned, eyes flicking to the scar near her temple. "You're the one," he said. "From the story." Clara didn't flinch. "I'm the one taking your order," she replied. The grin faltered. The others laughed awkwardly, and the tension dissipated as quickly as it had formed. They ordered. They ate. They left without incident. Stefano watched it all without interference. "That," he said later, "was restraint." Clara shrugged. "It's easier when you know you're not alone." He met her gaze. "You aren't." As the night wore on, the diner found its rhythm again, not the old one, but a new, steadier beat. Conversations flowed. Laughter returned, quieter but sincere. People lingered a little longer, less afraid of what might happen if they were seen. When closing time came, Clara wiped down the counter and stacked chairs with the others. The manager locked the door and turned off the lights one by one. Stefano stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets, waiting. Outside, the street was calm. "You did well," he said as they stepped onto the sidewalk. "So did you," Clara replied. "You stayed out of it." "That was the point," he said. They walked side by side for a block, neither in a hurry to leave the moment behind. The city moved around them, indifferent but alive. "What happens next?" Clara asked. Stefano stopped and turned to face her. "That depends on what you want," he said. "You've seen what this world is like. You've felt its weight." She thought for a moment. "I want Rivano's to stay open," she said. "I want it to be safe. And I want people to know silence isn't protection anymore." Stefano considered her words carefully. "Then you'll have to stay visible." "I can do that," she said. He nodded once. "Good." They parted ways at the corner, Stefano disappearing into the night with the same quiet certainty he always carried. Clara watched him go, then turned back toward Rivano's, now dark and empty behind her. She touched the scar near her temple, not with regret, but with resolve. She had returned, not as a victim, not as bait, but as something else entirely. And Rivano's had returned with her. By morning, Rivano's diner looked exactly the way it always had. The windows were clean. The checkered floor shone faintly under the soft glow of the lights. The counter smelled of fresh coffee and disinfectant, the sharpness of the night before scrubbed away with deliberate care. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't felt the way the room froze, the way fear shifted shape, you might have believed nothing had happened at all. But people remembered. They remembered the sound first, the crack of impact that cut through conversation like glass breaking. They remembered the silence afterward, heavy and accusing. And most of all, they remembered the moment the door opened, and a man in a black suit walked in as if the room already belonged to him. Stories spread the way they always do, quietly at first, then faster. Details blurred, names were whispered, and sometimes changed. Some said the waitress had stood her ground, others said she never raised her voice. A few insisted the man who ended it all never touched the attacker at all, that he only looked at him and the fight was over. The truth lived somewhere between all of it. Clara heard the stories without comment. She listened the way she always had, without interrupting, without correcting. She learned quickly which details mattered and which were distractions. People weren't interested in accuracy. They were interested in meaning, and the meaning was simple. Something had shifted. Rivano's filled steadily over the next few weeks. Some faces disappeared for good, choosing distance over accountability. Others returned cautiously, testing the atmosphere like swimmers dipping a toe into cold water. New customers arrived too, drawn by curiosity as much as comfort. They spoke carefully at first, eyes flicking toward Clara as she passed. She met them all the same way, calm, professional, unmoved. The scar near her temple faded from pink to pale, but it never vanished completely. She didn't try to hide it. It was part of her now, a marker of something survived rather than something lost. People noticed it, glanced at it, sometimes stared. Clara let them. It reminded her where she'd been and why she stayed. Stefano returned often, but never predictably. Sometimes he sat at the counter, coffee untouched, watching the room with quiet focus. Other times he took a booth near the back, speaking in low tones to men who arrived alone and left quickly. He never announced himself, never demanded attention. Yet the moment he entered, the room adjusted. Power, Clara learned, didn't need noise. They rarely spoke at length anymore. They didn't need to. Their understanding lived in small exchanges, brief glances, a raised eyebrow, a shared pause when something felt off. Stefano trusted her instincts. Clara trusted his restraint. It was an arrangement built not on promises, but on awareness. One evening, a young couple came in just before closing. They slid into a booth near the window, laughing softly, unaware of the history layered into the space around them. Clara took their order and returned with their food, listening as they spoke about plans and possibilities, their voices unguarded. As she walked away, she caught Stefano watching them. "They don't know," she said quietly when she passed him. "No," he replied. "That's the point." Over time, Clara noticed how the diner changed people. Men who once spoke loudly learned to lower their voices. Conversations that used to linger too close to the edge now stayed within it. Rivano's neutrality remained, but it had grown teeth. Silence no longer protected cruelty. It exposed it. Late one night, as Clara wiped down the counter, a man she didn't recognize lingered near the door. He hesitated, then approached cautiously. "I heard about you," he said. "About what happened." Clara met his gaze evenly. "What about it?" He swallowed. I just wanted to say, it mattered that you came back. She nodded once. It mattered that people noticed. He left without another word. When closing time came, Clara stepped outside into the cool night air, locking the door behind her. The street was quiet, washed in amber light. She stood there for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the city, thinking about the version of herself who had walked into Ravano's for the first time with nothing but a need for tips and a desire to stay unnoticed. That girl hadn't known what neutrality cost. She did now. Stefano joined her a moment later, adjusting his jacket as he looked down the street. "You've changed this place," he said. "So have you," Clara replied. He shook his head slightly. "I enforced something. You embodied it." She considered that. "People think strength looks like domination," she said. "They think it's loud." "And now?" Stefano asked. "Now they're learning it looks like restraint," Clara said. "Like knowing when to step in and when to stand your ground." They stood side by side in silence, the city breathing around them. "What will people remember?" Clara asked eventually. Stefano didn't answer right away. He watched a car pass, its headlights briefly illuminating the street before fading into darkness. "They'll remember the moment fear changed direction," he said. "They'll remember that silence isn't the same as peace. And they'll remember that kindness mistaken for weakness carries consequences." Clara nodded. That was enough. As they parted ways, she glanced back at Ravano's one last time. The lights were off now, the diner resting until morning, but she could almost feel it watching her in return. No longer neutral, no longer blind. People would keep telling the story. They would change it, polish it, exaggerate it. But at its core, it would remain the same. A waitress was knocked to the floor. No one moved, and then someone did. That was what people remembered, and that was what endured. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.